It is now more than a month that we have been on strike after having notified the government about our dissatisfaction with the erosion of the common law.
Some have credited this lawyers' rally in Bamenda and the speech made by Barrister Harmony Bobga Mbuton as the beginning of what became known as the Ambazonian Revolution. The general uprising of the people of southern Cameroons that followed the rally, the violent response by the government of La République du Cameroon, and the unflinching resistance by the population in the face of a carnage which some have called a genocide, is now the preoccupation of the international community.
The frustrating thing is a lot of this was needless. As I said, we all know the history, we all know where this is coming from, and the Anglophone population of Cameroon would very much like to be considered as first-class citizens, and there is a sense that they feel like, and they have felt a long time, like they're second-class citizens. It is up to dialogue and true dialogue to move this process forward.
For the dialogue to have meaning, it must start by dealing with the root causes. For it is the root causes that took the lawyers to the street, where they met with violence that left a lot of them beaten up, jailed, and some escaped into exile. It is in exile in the United States that I caught up with Barrister Harmony Bobga Mbuton and started by asking him how the situation that became such a challenge to the lawyers came about.
By mid-2015, a rough assessment demonstrated that the Southern Cameroon institutions and values had been completely eroded. And the last of these institutions and the values, its collection of values that were still hanging on, was the area of law, the judicial system, particularly the common law. And this realization was sparked by the fact that there was a sudden avalanche of personnel which was not familiar with the common law sent by government into the common law jurisdictions. For example, we could assess that from the registers of the court to the state council, that's the attorney's office, from divisional up to regional levels, were about 80% not just francophones, but people trained in the civil law, which is dramatically different from the common law. So we began to see a strategic move to fill the structure of the common law courts with a civil law content in terms of personnel, which meant we were going to lose the content of the common law, and it will become easier for government to just wipe out the structure of the common law we were hanging on. We decided then to have a common law conference. I mean, I mooted that idea. And we were not, comfortable just doing it within the Northwest. So a team of us moved over to the Southwest and discussed with our colleagues there, and they bought the idea. So on the 9th of May, we congregated in Bamenda at the Big Mancon Catholic Hall in Bamenda and had a very successful conference, the inaugural conference of the common law lawyers in Cameroon. What was most interesting in it is that at the close of that conference, we came up with far-reaching resolutions. And we didn't only give resolutions, we gave new directions for correction of what we had complained about. And as a major point, we gave government time. I personally had in the press briefing 6 months that I gave government when I had a press briefing with the entire press that was present. I gave 6 months as the time after which, if we don't hear from government, we're going to take the next steps. Curiously, some of my colleagues who were in the hall rushed out and indicated they wanted to participate in the press conference. Of course, I didn't stop them. I welcomed the idea. But one of the things they introduced, which I wasn't comfortable with, was the idea that we should change from 6 months and talk about reasonable time. For me, reasonable time was rather fluid. And their argument was that we cannot be giving instructions to government. And that put me on guard, because I could see fear creeping into their minds. And I said, if we were serious about what we were asking from government, the minimum we required was to set a deadline. But because I did not want a split from that very takeoff, I accommodated the idea of reasonable time. And in fact, I went ahead when the journalists hammered on it to say that reasonable time in law for common law jurisdictions and even under statute in East Cameroon would not go beyond 60 days. But since I gave 6 months and my colleagues have suggested reasonable time, the debate now is between 60 days and 6 months. But true to type, my suspicion that fear was catching up with my colleagues came to pass, because after 6 months, despite the fact that I already had what I had conceived as the bullet to send out after 6 months, nobody was ready to accompany me. They were only interested in holding another conference. And my question was, what have you achieved from the resolution of the first conference that you want to move to the second conference? It now became like, okay, people wanted a show of having done something. I keyed into that and settled for the second conference. Now, when it came to the second conference, there was a problem. I mean, a few weeks, about 2 or 3 weeks to that second conference, we were not having any indication of assurance that that conference would hold. There was no preliminary agenda. There was no theme. And there was no authorization. In fact, word went out that it would not be possible to have an authorization because of the attitude of the governor of Southwest. By and large, it came to pass that an authorization was issued. And 48 hours to that conference, we still did not have an agenda. We did not have a theme. And I spoke with my colleague in Boya, and he said, okay, if you have some idea, you can send. So I sent a draft agenda by email, and I sent, it also incorporated a proposed theme, which of course centered more or less on the way forward from the Bamenda inaugural conference. Until I went to Boya, the eve of the conference in Boya, there was no draft resolution. The agenda had not been reviewed, and we were not sure who was going to do the keynote address. But since I was taking all precautions, I had prepared the something like post-inaugural conference disposition, which was going to be the theme, common law, whither thou. That was the theme I suggested. And then I proposed the agenda. And then I gave something like a roadmap that would be followed to secure the implementation of the resolutions of Bamenda, inclusive of the filing of an action within, in the Constitutional Council, ostensibly not to secure a positive result from the Constitutional Council, because we knew if government would not answer us after we served them with the resolution, it is not their courts who would do it. But it was designed to demonstrate to the international fora that we had exhausted local remedies, and we could now then take our matter before international jurisdictions like the African Commission for Human and People's Rights for a determination of whether or not there had ever been an act of union between Southern Cameroons that was programmed to become independent on the 1st of October 1961 and its neighbor, the Republic of Cameroon, that had already secured its own independence, so to speak, on the 1st of January 1960. With this move, we were virtually saying that we know that there is no act of union, but for benefit of doubt, if the Republic of the Cameroon had something in the nature of an act of union, they should demonstrate it to us. And if it were, we would then ask, have the elements of the act of union as propagated in propaganda that we had a federal constitution in 1961, have they been respected? And if they have been respected, why have all the institutions, including the judicial system of the common law that we adopted, we cherished and adopted after the Brits left us in West Cameroon, why are they being eroded? Are they being democratically removed?
It was a question the government of La République du Cameroun was not about to answer. Unfortunately for them, the people of Southern Cameroons were not done yet.
And as we were gathering momentum, the teachers on the sidelines were having their own discussion in the corridors of the Ministry of Secondary Education and the Ministry of Higher Education. They were also complaining about the compromise of the Anglo-Saxon subsystem of education, which we had inherited, adopted and adapted to our specific circumstances and were enjoying in Southern Cameroon. Unfortunately, the policy became very obvious to us, although it was not written as such, that they wanted to wipe out the education system that we cherish, our legal system that we cherish, on top of the earlier destruction of our economy, from the destruction of the Cameroon Bank, the destruction of the marketing board. Things that East Cameroon never had, that's the Republic of Cameroon never had. They just completely compromised them. The legislature was wiped out. The executive that existed in self-government between 1954 and 30th September 1961, when we were supposed to become independent, was gradually diluted and eventually flushed. So when we brought this, it was like a new awakening amongst other sectors in Cameroon. The fight that SCNC had carried out that far with SCAPO, which were derided as the idle pastime of retirees, when it was now seen through the prism of the action of the lawyers partnering with teachers, blew up everything, and there was a sudden groundswell of unison among Southern Cameroonians within the territory. And when the news filtered to the diaspora, the Southern Cameroonians in the diaspora joined as if they had sat in southern Cameroon and planned this strategic renaissance of our assertion of our legal and political identity by way of saying we have never been a federation and we don't want to be a federation with the Republic of Cameroon. We want an independent state for ourselves, as the trusteeship agreement that entrusted us to the Brits from the United Nations had envisioned. And it's through the discourse that fueled the emergent revolt that we began to piece together some of the information that threw more light on where we were coming from, where we were, and the impending danger of extinction of our identity and our values. This, in fact, also had far-reaching effects because it brought an awakening of the partnership between the government of the Republic of Cameroon. Let me call it the establishment, because it's not just those who are presently in government, but every other person who has participated in governance of Cameroon, who constitute the Cameroon establishment, whether they are in government or not. They are the people who work out how to annihilate southern Cameroon. And they are in a partnership with the French establishment. Not the French people, but the French establishment. And unfortunately, the silent complicity of Great Britain, whose values we had adopted. It now dawned on us that the closure of the British Council Library in Bamenda was an indicator that Britain was doing the final packing of its bags from Southern Cameroon territory, because it has dishonestly, secretly traded us to their brothers of the House of Hanover, the French. And today, we have the strong spirit for restoration of the independent statehood of Southern Cameroon. The government suddenly awoken from sleep. The government of the Republic of Cameroon, they woke up from sleep because they thought that the deal about sealing us up from the face of the earth had been done. They suddenly woke up to find the sand under their feet of assimilation moving at an unprecedented speed. On that account, they now decided to descend on Southern Cameroonians brutally. In fact, they transformed Southern Cameroon into a war theater. Thanks to modern communication technology, these atrocities, that is, the early activities of a genocide, were shipped out through internet to the international community, and it began to shock the crystallized conscience of the international community. I don't know. I cannot credit Cameroon government with a lot of intelligence. So I don't know whether it is the conspirators in France and in Britain who told them, hey, shut the internet up, because the more people know about what you are doing, the more difficult it would be for us to protect you. And they shut up internet in Southern Cameroon. It's been running now. It's on the way to its 70th day. That is the resistance, the unprecedented resistance of every blue blood Southern Cameroonian, even within the elements, the black legs of refugees from East Cameroon who had been received and accommodated when the Bamlikis and the Basars suffered their own genocide. The resistance that Southern Cameroonians have put forth still shocks the world today. Even though they pretend to close their eyes to it, they know that without arms, the spirit of people can withstand. And as we speak, I understand why our movements for the restoration of the independence of Southern Cameroon is having difficulty, despite the commonness of objective to restore Southern Cameroon. We're still having difficulty of putting our acts together in a framework that will give us the opportunity of designing a common strategic plan with a central authority to execute that plan. To the extent that some well-meaning people are now propounding some weird theories that there can only be fluid unity. In science, fluidity implies inability to contain. But if I can use just the idea of generating electricity from waterfall, if you do not harness the liquid water and pass it through particular turbines, you cannot generate electricity in its optimal quantity from the best waterfall. So I reject the theory of fluid unity, because fluid unity is not an ingredient of a revolution. And whether we like it or not, we are in a revolution. It is important to distinguish this from the various groups operating as slates that will eventually transform into independent political formations when Southern Cameroon has been restored and they can compete. Because the moment you are different, you are competing. There is no competition that will secure more than 50% compliance on an agenda. Competition means I am doing my own totally my own way, you are doing your own totally my own way. And it also implies the total loss of synergy that is a requisite of putting people together in order to have the maximum force for faster delivery of our restored country.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope my engagement with Barrister Harmony Bob Gambuton and his responses have thrown a bright light on some of the events, some of the issues, so that as we navigate from the wild back to our independence, we do it with better caution, we do it with better understanding, and reduce the amount of mistakes so that we can find ourselves back home safely. Thank you.